Morning. Oh, sorry, not good morning anymore. Good afternoon. Welcome today, and thanks everybody for attending today's presentation covering freight logistic trends in Georgia, the 2024 ARC Freight Mobility Plan, and ARC's local freight cluster plans. We're excited to host this meeting and discuss all things freight. Thank you to Kimley Horn for sponsoring the event today, and of course, thank you to Daniel Studdard, the program manager for freight planning at ARC, for joining us today and sharing this information with us. Before we get started, my name is Tom Glickert with Kimley Horn. I'm the president of ITS Georgia, and I'm thrilled to share some information about what we have planned for the back half of the year. Membership, our members are the backbone of our organization. Membership remains open for the 2023 calendar year. And just as a reminder, as our annual meeting is coming up, there is a $200 discount for annual meeting registration with membership. So if you haven't signed up yet, please speak with some of the folks back at your office, or if you got a company card, I say just go ahead and knock it out and be done with it. We have some exciting content planned for the upcoming months here. Emily Dwyer with GDOT, Mary Thumati with SEI, and Farah Glasgow with Utilicom are leading our program committee. In July, we'll be meeting back at City Springs to talk with some vendors at a vendor roundtable. And then in August, we'll be hosting a joint meeting with Georgia ITE. Still working out some of the final details on that meeting, but it's looking very promising. So looking forward to sharing some more of that information with you in the next few weeks. 2023 annual meeting, which will be taking place in Jekyll Island, from September 24th to the 26th, is coming up very fast. Holly Painter with KCI is chairing the conference, and I'll pass it over to her for an update. No, you need to come and give us an update. I don't know what's happening at the annual meeting.
The website is updated, the registration is open, and the room blocks are open on the website. Saturday room block is full right now. They will honor the price for the room block if you book Friday and Saturday. But if you have any questions, just email me or email conference at ITSGA. But we sign up as sponsors. We have four sponsors actively, and Emily is leading that right now.
Okay, and you do not want Emily knocking on your door looking for money. So if you didn't hear Holly, registration is open, the room block is open. Saturday is sold out, but if you book for the entire weekend, that would be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you will get they will honor that room block code. So feel free to make a weekend out of it. It's a gorgeous hotel that we're staying in, so it should be a great time. This November, as per tradition, ITS Georgia will be hosting the Best of ITS Georgia Awards at Maggiano's. We look forward to highlighting some of the cool projects that y'all have been working on in 2023. Keep an eye out on your email for submission requests and updates. Those should be coming out mid to late July, so be prepared for that. Before I invite Mike Ruel with Kimley Horn up, I'm pleased to welcome some of the officers and director nominees to share their reason for looking to serve an ITS Georgia board or officer position. ITS Georgia is hosting elections currently this year for 4 officers for all of our officer positions, so president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, and 4 of our director positions. So for those who are here and looking to speak, if you could make your way up to the front, and I'll introduce you. And I'll pass it off first to Matt Glasser, who with Arcadis, who's running for president.
I was going to call Holly out for not coming up, but here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Glasser. I've been a part of the board of directors for about 6 years, and looking to make the step up to take Tom's shoes, which will be tough to fill. Very teeny tiny shoes, but luckily I'm just like maybe a size above it, so toes won't be too cramped. Anyway, I think over the last few years, we've been on a really great course, and ultimately, for the folks that have been on the board, the shoes that we continue trying to fill have been Bill Wells, and ultimately, the path that we look to go down is making sure that the organization's stable, that as we pass a baton from one group to the next, that you know full well what you're getting yourself into. And so I'm looking to continue that tradition that we've been setting up and hope that I can get your book for that. Thanks.
Oh gosh, okay. I'm Holly Painter. I'm running for vice president, and I'm here to make sure he doesn't mess up. No, I'm just kidding. I've been on the ITS Georgia board for 2 years now, and have really come to love this family and being part of ITS Georgia, and would love the support to run for vice president. And like Matt said, fill some big shoes, because it is a great organization. It's really, really fun to be part of. And also, please register for the conference. I'm just kidding.
Thank you, Holly. My name is Michael Presley. See some familiar faces, a lot that I don't know. I'll tell you a little bit about myself really quickly. I retired from GDOT with 30 years of service as a district engineer down in Thomaston, over 31 counties, 500 people, and all the politicians. So I've always been a champion for ITS, even though I might not have been in and around this group. I was around when ITS Georgia was developed. And ITS America, I've done several white papers and presented those at ITS Georgia, ITS World Congress, and ITS America over the years. From its inception, the Navigator program, before it was called Navigator, I was there. Mark Demidovich actually hired me, and I give him credit for several right decisions during his career, and that was one of them. So built the TMC, the HERO program, from the ground up, but I think, and actually won an innovation award from ITS Georgia for some things I did at the district level. Deployments in Macon, Columbus, during my tenure there, and the first of its kind District Operations Center, which is a satellite of, and similar to a TMC at a county, but with a little different focus on customer service and ITS. Traditional ITS. And I guess none of that matters in terms of me running for secretary, but I have a lot of energy, and I have a lot of ideas and a lot of innovation in my blood, and to re-engage with ITS, which is in my blood, is something that I'm looking forward to doing. So, thanks.
Hi, I'll keep this short. I'm Caitlin Stewart. I work with the Georgia Department of Transportation. I started my career in the ITS group, and I'm currently working with SIGOPS. But I take a personal responsibility to make sure that the ITS and SIGOPS groups have open lines of communication. So I think being a SIGOPS representative, and I see plenty of other SIGOPS people here, which I'm really excited about. And then as a personal goal, I've been on the program committee for the past year, and Emily and I have been talking about ways to engage younger engineers in the industry, because I think we, as an organization, sometimes struggle with gearing maybe our programming and just maybe our advertising to the entry-level engineers who have been here coming in, interns, first year, second year, third year engineers. So I think that this could be an avenue that I could really help support our program with. Thanks.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, everybody else. So from what I'm hearing, get ready for the ITS Georgia Tic Tac accounts. That was a joke. Nobody laughed. We have several nominees who couldn't make it today. So we look forward to sharing their information in upcoming weeks through e-blasts, social media, and through our website, itsga.org. Finally, happy to hand it off to Mike Ruel with Kimley Horn, who is our sponsor today, to share some updates and news.
All right, well, thank you, Tom. And I am not running for the board or any one of the ITS Georgia positions, because after 2 years running, I could not take a third year of rejection. Anyways, so my name is Mike Ruel. I think I know a lot of y'all. I have been with Kimley Horn for 21 years and been in numerous Kimley Horn offices across the country, but really feel like I've found a home here in Georgia, and so much so I was even talking to somebody about potentially buying a house. So anyways, haven't got there yet. But my background is primarily ITS and a little bit of software, technology, networks. But by and large, I think a lot of you probably know Kimley Horn. But in case you don't, I actually did look up just a couple of quick facts before. And anytime I do that, which is like once a year or once every 2 years, I'm always shocked at how much the numbers jump up and the different services we provide. But in total, Kimley Horn has just over 8,100 employees, and those employees are spread out across 128 offices in the United States, and then we've got one in Puerto Rico. And I think you all know we do a lot in the traffic ops space. We've got a very big local group that does ITS and traffic signal design and some technology type stuff, like I mentioned, networks and software. But we've really got a huge, and I like to call it a one-stop shop when it comes to all things civil engineering. And so anything from roadway design, structural, vertical, and horizontal, land development, landscape architecture. We've got a big planning group that does a lot of large master plans and long-term comp plans. All that to say is I really feel like when folks utilize Kimley-Horn, they've really got resources that are able to deliver on all aspects of their project. And then just to kind of bring it back to Georgia a little bit, we've got 4 offices in Georgia, 3 of which are in the greater Atlanta area. And I asked if I could mention what will soon be our 4th Atlanta office, and I was told no, so that's to remain under wraps, but hopefully that'll open in the next probably month or 2. And all total between those 4 offices, we have 425 people in the state of Georgia. So I thought that was pretty incredible and larger than I thought we were. So that was pretty cool. And then last but not least, I just kind of wanted to touch on all those services I mentioned before I moved to Atlanta, which was right before COVID happened in January of 2020. I was in Milwaukee for a number of years and then Chicago for a number of years. And I was our only Kimley-Horn employee in Wisconsin at the time. And then when I moved to Chicago, we were really big when it came to private sector services. But we had a very small group of folks that did public sector projects. And when I say public sector, really any public sector projects, roadway, transit, structural, ITS, and traffic operations. And we really just weren't all that well known in the community. And what I love about being down here in Georgia in the 3.5 years that I've been here is really just the number of different projects and areas throughout the state that Kimley-Horn touches. It's hard to drive anywhere in Atlanta really and not be able to point out a land development project or a roadway project or one of the Beltline trail segments. And Kimley-Horn has been involved in that. So it's really cool to actually see the impact that we have in the community and then be able to point out all these cool projects to any of my friends and family. So with that, again, if you want to know more about Kimley-Horn, feel free to stop by and ask me about it. And then one additional plug I wanted to make, and I didn't clear this with Tom, but we are going to be forming a joint subcommittee for connected and automated vehicles, and that'll be a joint effort between ITS Georgia and then ITE Georgia. So if you're interested in being a part of that, please let me know. We would love to have you involved. So with that, turn back to Tom.
Thank you, Mike. And of course, thank you to Kimley-Horn for their continued support of ITS Georgia. So we'll get on to our presentation, and I'm pleased to hand it off to Farah Glasgow, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Farah with Utilicom, introducing Daniel Studdard with ARC. He is a principal planner at the Atlanta Regional Commission, where he manages ARC's freight planning program. He is the project manager for the 2024 Atlanta Regional Freight Mobility Plan and for the ARC's freight cluster plans. He also leads the ARC Freight Advisory Task Force. Prior to joining ARC in 2014, Daniel spent a decade in consulting, doing transportation planning and traffic studies, as well as 3 years in communications field. He has a master's degree in city and regional planning from Georgia Tech and a BA in journalism from the University of Georgia. Welcome, Daniel.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I don't think I realized Kimley-Horn was actually the sponsor. They were actually part of the consultant team on our regional freight plan, but I doubt anyone here is a part of it because their focus is mostly on land use in this transportation plan. So, but good to see some Kimley-Horn folks here. I have enjoyed working with them so far. As you said, my name is Daniel Studdard. I manage the freight planning program at the Atlanta Regional Commission. I'm going to go over a little bit of everything when it comes to what we do in terms of freight planning in our region. I'm going to touch on our cluster plans, which are local. I'm going to talk about our regional freight plan. I'm going to talk about some big picture trends. And I'd like to start with what you see here. This kind of lays out what we've done in terms of freight planning over the last 20 years. We did a major regional freight plan from 2005 to 2008. We did a truck route master plan that was completed in 2010. I then started in 2014, and I was soon after that was tasked with doing an update to that 2008 plan. We completed that in 2016. It has a pretty long project list. As you could guess, we have a lot of infrastructure needs when it comes to freight. And then like all good plans, it recommended that we should do more planning. It recommended that we should do a truck parking study because we saw that we were kind of hearing anecdotally that folks were seeing more trucks parked on highway ramps and in parking lots, strip mall parking lots, office parking lots, things like that. And that truckers just didn't have enough places to stop overnight. And we were also hearing that was an issue nationally. So we decided to do a study to kind of find out how much of an issue that was here in the region. It also recommended what eventually became known as our freight cluster plans. These came about because in the 2016 plan, our project list, we realized we knew the big projects, the big interchange projects, some of the highway projects, so the capacity projects, things like that. But we didn't really know the local needs as much as we wanted. ARC does a lot of local planning. The LCI program is something you've probably heard of. It's been around for over 20 years, lots and lots of local plans related to LCI. But the L in LCI is livable, and areas with a lot of industrial development are generally not all that livable. So these areas had kind of been ignored over the years, and we thought that we really needed to focus on them a little bit more and find out what those local needs were when it comes to transportation and freight needs. So the idea of freight clusters came up as we were doing that 2016 plan. We looked at industrial development through the region, not zoning, not land use, but actually where was it located. And we certainly saw we have industrial development in every single county in our region, but we also saw that industrial development very commonly is located near other industrial development. No big surprise there. And the biggest concentrations are what you see here on this map, shaded there in purple. And so we said if we could do some additional planning in these areas, the recommendations, they could have a big impact when it comes to transportation and freight movement, but also in terms of economic development and jobs. Because really, industrial areas are job centers. They're not like downtown and midtown Atlanta. They're not office jobs. They're not high rises. They're not gleaming buildings. But they're hugely important for jobs, for economic development, but also just because, as we learned during COVID, we really need stuff. We always need stuff every single day. And so that's what makes it happen. And while it's not where most of us spend our time, most of our days, it's really important just for our day-to-day lives. And so we created the Freight Cluster Plan program to focus on these areas. We said it had to always, each plan had to cover the elements that you see here. Each one would do an existing conditions and needs assessment. Each plan would do a traffic study. We would do a lot of outreach efforts trying to talk to the private sector, find out what was working, what wasn't in each area. And then of course would come up with a recommendations list. And each one of these plans, it would not be led by ARC. We would provide 80% of the funding, but we would be working with either a city or a county or a CID as the local sponsor to lead these plans. So we cover a lot in each of these plans. You can see a list here covering some of the highlights. So we're looking at roads and bridges, of course. We're looking at safety, looking at crash data. We're looking at signage and lighting. Railroads, we're looking at railroad activity, but also looking at railroad crossing issues, because sometimes you may have a low bridge, sometimes you may have an at-grade crossing where trucks often get stuck. It's pretty common in our region, shockingly so, that the approach goes up to a railroad crossing. The railroad tracks itself are at a little bit higher grade than the approach roadways. Not a big deal in a passenger car, but sometimes, certain locations, trucks get stuck, and occasionally they then get hit by a train. One just about 2 weeks ago in Union City. The video's online, you can Google it. I think WSP had it, a lot of other websites had it, where somebody just had a cell phone video and you see a truck get hit by a train and a lot of materials go flying. I think it was cat litter that was in it. So luckily the truck driver got out. She was safe, but it's kind of impressive to watch. Impressive in a bad way, but that's why we want to look at safety issues like that, because while they don't happen every day, they're certainly a big deal when they do happen. Even though nobody got hurt, it certainly shut down that rail line right there for an extended time period while they dealt with the mess that was created. We also look at truck parking. Mentioned that we did a truck parking study at the regional level a few years ago, but you can only go so far at the regional level with a study like that. And so this is an opportunity to kind of find out what's happening locally, where there are problems, and then potential solutions to deal with that issue. As I mentioned before, we do a traffic study for each one of these plans. So go out, do those AM and PM peak hour turning movement counts, do that existing conditions analysis and at least one future year analysis. Some of these areas probably have not had a traffic study in many years, if not decades, outside of potentially a DRI in those study areas. But of course, a DRI is really just going to look at that development in nearby intersections. So this is an opportunity to look at an entire corridor or an entire study area. So some examples would be like Fulton Industrial Boulevard, where we could go down and look at everything on that corridor in one comprehensive traffic study. Same on Moreland Avenue near 285. Other locations like that where we really haven't necessarily done a traffic study in a while. This is a good opportunity to do that. What we found is no big surprise. This is where some of our best recommendations come from. A lot of traffic operations recommendations come out of doing these studies and can really have a big impact on what's happening there locally. These aren't the billion-dollar projects that really have a big impact at a regional level, but if you're a business that's on one of these streets and you make a change that impacts them, they may have a couple hundred trucks going in and out every single day, or sometimes 1,000 or more, then it can have a big impact on those individual businesses. But we're not just trying to move trucks. We're also looking at access to jobs, which means transit access, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, TDM programs. One of the things that we hear from these industrial businesses is that sometimes it's a major challenge just to get employees to these workplaces. I've actually had somebody tell me one time, if an employee shows up for day number 2, then they think they can keep that employee for a while. Because day number 1, if they don't have a car, they can find a ride. It's a new job. They talk to somebody, a friend, a family member, they get a ride. By day 2, they can't get a ride, they don't show up, that person's gone. So literally just getting them to the job is a major challenge, and so certainly we look at that in each one of these plans as well. And then we also stress, go out in the field and do a field review and find out what is really going on. You know, doing a traffic study is great, looking at big data sources is great, but you really have to go out and find out what's happening in your study area. I took this photo, this is in the city of Atlanta, in Northwest Atlanta. Took this photo maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I wasn't looking for this as a problem. I just needed photos of trucks for another presentation because I work in freight, so that's something that I need sometimes. And I knew this was a good location to find trucks. This is on Marietta Road in Northwest Atlanta next to Norfolk Southern Inman Yard. And what you're seeing here, the truck with the green container that takes up most of this photo is attempting to turn left into a driveway for Inman Yard. What you can just barely see just past that truck is another truck with an identical green container that is attempting to make a right turn out of Inman Yard. Got to make a right turn in a truck, guess what? You've got to swing out wide. You swing out wide on a fairly narrow 2-lane road like this, you're going to go into the lane of the opposing traffic, which meant that the truck that was exiting proceeded to block the truck that you see here in the photo. They ended up in a little bit of a standoff heading towards each other. Neither one could go forward, and because these are big trucks, other traffic behind them, they couldn't just throw it in reverse and back up. And so they got stuck there for a little bit. As you can see, the other traffic those drivers got a little frustrated, started driving on the side of the road, on the other side of utility poles here, as you can see, which is not great for safety. Just out of frame, that next parcel has a chain link fence with a lot of signs that say no smoking, hazardous materials, things like that. Having folks just drive on the dirt and grass over there is not good at a site like that. And it's not great for a pedestrian like me. Admittedly, I was the only person walking around out there, but it meant I kind of had to scramble and get out of the way. So we really stress, go out there, find out what's happening in the study area, because something like this is not always immediately apparent. These 2 truck drivers eventually figured it out, got past each other. Immediately 2 other truck drivers went into the exact same position and it started all over again. It took like 10-15 minutes to truly clear this. And so it was kind of fascinating and as well as horrifying that this was like 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon that something like this was happening, not peak hour at all. So finding issues like this and then finding ways to address them is certainly a key part of each of these plans. We also do a lot of outreach. Something like what you saw on that previous slide, I bet the truck drivers there could tell you about that. And so we really stress, talk to the private businesses, find out what's happening in those study areas, find out what's working, what's not, where are the major hangups like what you're seeing on that other slide. We also want to talk about what's happening regionally, and so each one of these plans, they will typically give presentations at ARC's Freight Advisory Task Force. And that's an opportunity where they can talk to myself and others at ARC, they talk to GDOT staff, as well as others in the private sector, others with CIDs that may have also done freight cluster plans. So we can kind of all learn best practices from each other. And also because what happens when it comes to freight, it's not just local, it's always at least regional, if not at the state and national level as well. And so kind of summing up where we are in terms of freight cluster plans, we've essentially have 8 that are complete right at this point. The 8th one is City of Atlanta, which is going through adoption right now. That's at that study area in Northwest Atlanta. The first one out of the gate, we kind of grandfathered in with South Fulton CID. They did what they called a multimodal plan, and they came up with the ideas. We're kind of creating this program, so we worked with them a little bit on the scope and kind of grandfathered them in. We've got 2 going on now. Town Center CID started a couple months ago, and then City of Stonecrest just started about 2 weeks ago. So we keep having folks ask us about these. When we created the program, we had no idea what the interest level would be, but as we can see, we kicked off number 10 here recently, and that's with the first one starting in 2019. So it seems like there's been a good bit of interest so far. And then, of course, we did kick off our 2024 regional freight plan last fall. And the benefit there is that we've got all these freight cluster plans that can now feed into that regional plan. So we've got that kind of local level knowledge that's then going to bubble up into that regional plan. So I mentioned the South Fulton CID and their multimodal plan that we kind of grandfathered in. It's kind of the first one out of the gate. And I want to mention because it does have a recommendation that's ITS related that they are starting to move forward with. This is McLaren Road. They're near the CSX Intermodal Terminal. And as you can see, they have some truck queuing issues on the approach to that facility. Truckers approach, and there's a spur line that goes off the main line into the CSX Intermodal facility. And the trains stop there sometimes for hours at a time. The reason is that the trains are too long to go in as one piece into that rail yard. So they have to stop, decouple, move them in pieces. Same thing when they build a long train, they kind of have to build it in pieces. And so they end up blocking that spur line for extended periods of time, which means that they block McLaren Road while they're doing that. Now, if it was you or I just kind of in a passenger vehicle, we'd make a U-turn and get out of there. These truckers can't really do that because the road is not wide enough for them to do that. So there's an ITS solution that's been proposed there. The idea is that there would be sensors there on the railroad tracks which would know if there's a train present, and if so, there's variable message signs on a couple different nearby roadways that then redirect trucks and anybody else that's on the nearby to go a different route. And so instead they would head down US 29 Roosevelt Highway, they would continue past the spur line, and then as they get further south, they can cross if need be at an at-grade crossing further to the south, and then double back if they need to, if that's where their destination is. It does add a few minutes of travel time, but that's much better than being stuck on McLaren Road literally for hours at a time potentially. So this is something I think is in concept design at this point, but it's something the CID has been working with the local jurisdictions as well as GDOT to move this forward. Air cargo operations. It's kind of a niche area for us. Only a small percentage of, less than 1% of our actual freight moves via air cargo, although I think it's something like 10% of the value of the goods in our regions moves by air cargo. So it tends to be more expensive goods that move by air cargo. You don't ship heavy things typically if you don't have to. We don't ship granite and construction materials, but things like electronics or your Amazon shipment that has to be here by tomorrow, that tends to be more air cargo related. I give this photo an example of a low-tech solution. This is just literally a truck staging lot. It's been there maybe 4 or 5 years at this point, and I remember somebody at the airport giving a presentation saying the reason they needed this, and it was under construction at the time, they had congestion there as truckers were trying to get to the loading docks, and they'd be stopped on the side of the road waiting to get in, and the truck drivers were literally getting in fistfights on the side of the road. And the guy from the airport telling me this said, look, I am not somebody who's going to go out and break up these fights. We've got to do something. So this was kind of the short-term solution of build this parking lot. They pull in there. There's actually a gate where they check in. They can call ahead and say, is my gate ready? Yes, it is. They head on in. If not, it's, hey, you'll get a call back when your dock is ready. Just relax there in the parking lot until that time comes. This is actually right next to the Uber and Lyft pickup lot, kind of on the south side of the airport there if you've ever been that far out in the airport area. So a low-tech solution, but certainly worthwhile and a good thing, beneficial to the airport. So now this is a higher tech solution. This is something that's been called an air cargo community system, implemented at the airport. I know there's a lot on that one slide. I actually had somebody from Collie Logistics who operates this, gave a presentation a few months ago at our freight task force meeting. I think she had 50 some odd slides, and so I'm condensing that to one slide, and so that's why you see a lot of information there. The short version that I will tell you is that when it comes to freight movement and air cargo, a lot of what happens is still very much pen and paper. It's still very much phone calls that get things done and pieces of paper with cargo manifests. It's not what we think of a lot of things being online. Certainly some things are, but certainly not everything. There's still a lot that's very 20th century. The idea with this program is that it takes a lot of things that are still 20th century, puts it online, puts it there in a dashboard, lets you know when things are ready for pickup, lets you know if a plane has arrived with air cargo, lets you know when your loading dock should be available, lets you make appointments so you can send your driver there at the appropriate time. The one example that always sticks out for me that the staffer from Collie Logistics gave me was that trucking companies that serve the airport would know, say, that they had an air cargo flight come in overnight. They assume it takes a few hours to unload, get in the warehouse. They say, it should be ready by 9 o'clock. I'm going to send my driver there at 9 o'clock. The problem is that every other trucking company just did the same exact thing. So everybody shows up at 9 a.m. wanting to make that pickup. There's not enough loading docks. There's not enough staff to do that at once. So you just end up with congestion there at the loading docks, and a lot of truckers just waiting, wasting time, wasting fuel if they're idling the truck, which then has air quality impacts. So the idea is that they can just make an appointment. Maybe they show up at 9 o'clock, maybe it's 10, 11, 12 o'clock, whatever time, but it means that they don't have to waste the time. They're not wasting fuel, which is money, and then they're not having those negative air quality impacts as well. So this is not an ARC initiative, but it's something that we kind of met the folks from Collie Logistics, and they started explaining this, and we said, this makes a lot of sense. We should do a lot more of this in our region because it's meant to promote efficiency and reducing wasted fuel and time and having a good impact on air quality. So we thought this was a good thing and kind of wanted to call it out as well. So now I'm going to move on to some aspects of our regional freight plan. A lot of information here. The next few slides are about land use. Don't worry, I will get back to transportation in a minute. But this is from Cushman & Wakefield, a real estate company research firm. This is looking at fourth quarter of last year. And during the fourth quarter, industrial vacancy rate was 3.3%. That means our region was virtually full. That is a very low, that is historically low vacancy rate, especially since we have nonstop industrial construction in our region. They called out that there was nearly 31.1 million square feet of new construction delivered across the region in 2022. That was the metro area's largest annual volume of new supply on record. I've been watching these types of statistics for years, and I probably have said that about other years multiple times in the past. I started at ARC in 2014, and it seems like every year it just keeps going up and up and up, and you have stats like that. You see Metro Atlanta recorded 9.2 million square feet of absorption in quarter four, more than any other market in the United States. So this is not just a lot for Metro Atlanta, what we have going on, it is a lot nationally. In that category, we were #1 nationally. If you watch this information, you can slice and dice this information a lot of different ways. Metro Atlanta is consistently top 10, if not top 5 in most categories, and sometimes will stand out as #1, depending on what you're actually looking at and the time period. And then lastly, despite the ongoing economic volatility, Atlanta is expected to remain among the nation's most active and competitive industrial markets during 2023. So we know that the economy is changing some. There's lots of things that say we're going to slow down, and then there are other things that say not quite yet. And so nobody really knows exactly where it's going. A lot of educated guesses are out there, but the expectation is, yes, it may slow down in Metro Atlanta, but it will still be pretty active, and we should still see pretty high demand this year and going forward. So I pulled that same information, same quarterly report for the first quarter of this year. Honestly, when I looked at some of the statistics, there was a lot of things that were kind of opposing information. So I didn't pull out all the individual ones. I will mention the vacancy rate ticked up to 3.6%. So that's an increase, but it's a tiny, tiny increase. You know, the typical rates could be 5, 6, 7%, and that'd be fairly normal. So this is still what we historically low rate, more or less, for the region. But I like this graph here that I was able to pull out of there. It's showing groundbreaking for new construction for industrial in the darker blue, and then project delivery there in the lighter blue. And you see where we were in 2022, a lot of groundbreaking for new construction. And then you see first quarter of this year, it really dropped off to just, I think, 4 groundbreakings there the first quarter of this year, which was much, much less than what we saw last year. And then delivery of new construction was still very high, or fairly high for first quarter. But that's because that's more of a lagging indicator. You have all that construction started last year, and in 2021, that's what's now being delivered at this point. Now again, just having 4 seems low, but those could all be million square foot developments, and you could do that every quarter, and you're talking about 16 million square feet, which is historically would be very high, except that we just kind of kept going up and up and up. During the Great Recession, we're talking like 500,000 million square feet, some years 2 million square feet maybe. So something like this is still at a very high rate relative over the past 10, 20 years. It's down from where we were the past couple of years because kind of COVID, we'd always been increasing, but then COVID really supercharged everything. So this is a national trend showing online retail spending. So online sales are still a relatively small part of our overall retail spending. Back in 2011, it was about 5% of the overall spend. And you see a nice, fairly straight increase there up through the end of 2019. Nice graph. You could kind of plot that out pretty easily. And then you see that first and second quarter of 2020, we skyrocketed up to 15%. And that's when COVID hit. And the logistics industry referenced it as getting about a decade of growth in a quarter of the year. And that's fairly accurate because we went from about 5% there in 2011 to about 10, 11% there into 2019 to 15% by the second quarter of 2020. You can see things have come back down a little bit. The level we're at now at that 15% is probably pretty close to where we would be if we follow that trend line out from 2019. So we've kind of come back to earth. Now, that said, 15% is still a lot higher than the 5% we were at in 2011. So there's a lot of activity going on when it comes to spending. And 15% may still seem, relatively small, but it's 3 times where we were in 2011. So that's why we're seeing so many new warehouses in part, because what you need to operate and deliver for e-commerce is a very different type of building typically than what you would, a typical warehouse, let's say, serving a big box facility. So I'll give you an example. Walmart, they've got a warehouse in Monroe, and then they've got a different, that serves stores. They have a different warehouse on South Fulton Parkway that's been there maybe 5 or 6 years that's just for e-commerce, because it's very different operations. One, you're moving pallets of stuff, and the other, you're literally workers going, grabbing one thing off a shelf, putting it into a box, wrapping it up, sending it out, doing the same thing over and over. So very different operations at the 2 types of buildings, and that's part of what's been spurring so much construction. So land use, and this is Kimley Horn folks that worked on this. This is CoStar real estate data that was been turned into a heat map. And so what we're seeing here is all industrial development in the region as of about, I think the third quarter of last year is when this was pulled. And you see that we've got about 717 million square feet of industrial development within ARC's boundaries. You add a few adjacent counties that are shown here on this map, and we jump up to about 846 million. That is a massive amount of industrial development, any type of development, but that is just a massive amount of industrial product that's in our region. No big surprises, kind of where it's located. You see a lot on the south and west sides of the region, a little bit further south on I-75 in Henry County, and then up I-85, that Gwinnett County corridor there, where you see the biggest concentrations of industrial development. So this is a subset of that. This is just warehouse distribution centers, pretty similar to the previous map, because the bulk of what we have in the region is warehouse distribution center. Again, most of it located there on the south and west sides of the region, then Henry County. Henry County is unique. It's a little bit of a sweet spot. If you're a truck driver in Henry County, you can go down to the port in Savannah, pick up a container, get back to Henry County, do it in one day, meet your hours of service requirements. You're doing it in Gwinnett, you're doing it in Douglas County, you're going to get in traffic in Metro Atlanta most every day, unless you can just time it perfectly. And so it's a lot tougher to do that from those other parts of the region. Henry County, southeast side, and then continuing into kind of Butts County is where development's going now as well. It's much easier because you're already on the southeast side of the region. So it's got that geographic advantage. The rest of the region doesn't. And that's why we've seen so much development recently, kind of the past 20 years is when that's been developing, because the port itself has been growing during that time period. This is just manufacturing. Let me stress this is a different scale that you're seeing on the heat map here. Manufacturing is a fairly small percentage of all the industrial in the region, but we had to use a different scale in terms of the heat map because otherwise probably everything would be purple if we use the same scale from the previous maps. But this shows a little bit of a different pattern. You see kind of to the northeast, North DeKalb, I-85, South Gwinnett area, we see that big concentration in manufacturing. And then you see a few locations that are not along interstate highways. Most everything that's warehouse related will be very close to an interstate highway or something like, Georgia 316. But you see a couple hot spots there in Peachtree City as well as in Griffin and Spalding County where they've actively gotten some manufacturing facilities out there. Kind of different type of jobs, a little more higher pay, higher skilled, but they don't have to be right near the highway, but they do still have to have a decent highway access. And then lastly, this shows the industrial properties built from 2016 to 2022. A little bit of a different pattern. You see, still a good bit on the south and west side, and then as I mentioned, a good bit down in Henry County. You don't see as much I-85 in South Gwinnett, but you see I-85 further up in North Gwinnett. Simply put, some of that closer in locations already built out, either with industrial or with lots of other land uses. And so this is kind of where the development's been going the past few years. So we look at all that land use because we want to know where the freight activity is happening, where is the trucking activity, because that then tells us where we need to focus in terms of our transportation planning, as well as we may adjust to those freight cluster boundaries. So we look at all the land use, and then we look at the corresponding transportation. And so this is RIDIS probe data showing where the truck trip origins are in our region. These are the biggest concentrations there that you see in blue and darker blue. They correspond fairly well with our existing freight clusters. You can see those on the map as well. A couple spots stood out to us when we first started looking at this map that were not in freight clusters. One up I-75 in Kennesaw near McCollum Airport. When our consultant called that out as a location to us, we said that's great because we're doing a freight cluster plan there. So it was good that we kind of corresponded and said, okay, we're doing that local planning there where the data shows us that there's a lot of trucking activity. And then this is the same data set looking at probe data for destinations. And again, it corresponds pretty well to that previous map. But this has kind of been our strategy, find out where the greatest needs are by looking at first those industrial land uses where we see a lot of that activity that will then generate trips, and then looking at the RIDIS probe data that shows us where that trucking activity is actually taking place. We've also done a few traffic counts in our region. I know there's a lot of information here. I'm not going to go through. I've got a couple slides like this that kind of breaks down the traffic data. Atkins is our sub that's handling this. They've really delved into this and with some detailed analysis. We did this because when we look at ITE trip generation rates, when it comes to warehouse industrial development, we know that they may not always be accurate. We know that there's been a lot of changes in design for warehouse. Like I said, that e-commerce activity is fairly different. And we know sometimes when you look at those trip gen rates, it'll say caution, only one or two locations were used to develop these rates. And we do DRI reviews at ARC, as does Greta. So we wanted to kind of do traffic counts, classification counts at a few locations to figure out what was really going on. So we didn't call out individual businesses on these slides because we didn't ask permission. We just had a vendor set up cameras in public location where they could point cameras at the driveways and we could get the classification counts, which mostly worked. Only one location actually took the camera from the vendor, but they were able to get it back, so it's all worked out. But this location, while we didn't call it out on the slide, I will say this is an Amazon facility. And we did the counts here in part because what you see there, the top right graph, the really tall bar that you see there, that's the total number of trips, not just trucking, but all trips there at the site. And the other 5 bar graphs that you see, bars on there, those are different warehouse industrial trip gen rates for a site of that location. So you can see there's big discrepancy, more than double the closest rate, but really those smaller ones, those first 3 are just a small fraction of what you see there. And so the difference here is that at this Amazon facility, it's not just the truckers that are coming in and out. It's not just the trucks bringing in goods. It's not just the trucks and vans going out to make deliveries. It's all those workers that are going in there, walking around, grabbing products off the shelf, putting them in a box, labeling it, shipping it out. So a lot of that is really passenger vehicles for all those employees, because something like this is very employee heavy. And so you get very different trip generation rates than maybe what's in there now for a traditional warehouse. And so that's key when we're doing those DRIs and other traffic studies, to kind of have an idea of how something like this may differ from those historic rates. So this location is more of a traditional warehouse. This is serving a big box store. Again, we didn't put it the location on here, but I will say it is the Publix warehouse distribution facility off of 316 in Gwinnett County. What really stood out to me was the number of truck trips per day. It's circled in red, but I called it out in bigger text at the very bottom. Over 2,000 daily truck trips from this one warehouse. It is a very large warehouse. It serves lots and lots of grocery stores. And certainly you would not get the same number of trips from other big box retailers. Say Home Depot doesn't have goods that probably expire every day, but a grocery store does. So they have a constant stream of trucks going in and out. But 2,000 truck trips a day, that's in line with what you would see at a railroad intermodal facility, the Inman Yard that I mentioned earlier. So that is just a massive amount of trucks. And you think of State Route 316 and the need to grade separate some of those interchanges. Developments like this are why, in part, because 2,000 trips a day from just this one industrial development, plus everything else that's along that corridor, really has a big impact on those roadway operations. Then this one and the next slide, these are both truck stops. I don't even remember the exact locations, but I call them out because they are very consistent with the ITE trip generation rates. Pointed the first two because there's discrepancies in here. Very, very consistent. So you see at the top right there, that's where we were looking at total trips, comparing it, I think first to just general gas station, and then the other one gas station with convenience store. So you can see it's pretty well in line. Bottom right, that's just the truck trips. You can see it's almost identical to what we would expect based on the ITE trip generation rates. So that is one that is very, very close. This is a different truck stop, different location, but also within our region. And again, very, very close to what you would get with the ITE trip generation rates. So it's something that, when we call the discrepancies, that's important, but when it's correct, if you're ever doing a traffic study for a truck stop, what's there should be fairly accurate, at least based on the counts that we've done so far. Lastly, I have to mention that ARC is hiring. I know most of you are not planners, but because one of these positions focuses on ITS, TSMO, and transportation technology, and then another one on electric vehicles and alternative fueling. If you know folks who might be interested, I don't think all these jobs are posted yet, but probably by next week you'll see those. We have all this both because of some turnover, but also because of kind of expanding our staff. So want to mention that wherever I can, because certainly getting candidates in is a challenge for everybody right now. So I had to give at least a quick mention that we have job openings coming up soon. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Got a question there in the back.
Is there any active talk about truck-only lanes anywhere in Metro freeways?
So the question was, is there any talk of truck-only lanes throughout Metro Atlanta? I think that's probably more of a GDOT question, if I'm being honest. It is basically the ones planned right now will go from north of Macon up to Henry County. I know that's I think in like a concept design or maybe going into design phase. There were certainly plans looking at a further expansion of that long before that piece was selected. It was that piece was selected because it was kind of doable compared to much of the rest of what could be in a plan compared to anywhere else, because it was a fairly rural section. I think, yes, there is some level of interest, but the cost could be prohibitive. The amount of impact, doing it in the section that's chosen is not cheap or easy. It is a long stretch. It's having major impacts. It's just it's a fairly rural area with the exception of town of Forsyth. And then as you get into Henry County, there's a lot of development there already that will have some impacts. But trying to get that further out through Metro Atlanta, you could certainly make the argument, do that on 285, do it up 85. Not so much 675 needs it, but certainly 75 and 85, both directions could use it. But it just becomes so expensive to do that. So it'd be a challenge to do that. But that's not to say there's not a need, but it's just figuring out if that's where the focus should be. Yeah. Hey. Thank you.
I don't need this.
Oh, well, they're recording, so
They want
that's
you
why
to use
need
it so they can record it.
Does the Fairburn deployment that you highlighted that has the cameras or the DMS that's going to reroute traffic to the staging area for the delivery. Is that implemented yet?
It is not implemented yet, no.
Are there plans to implement it?
To the best of my knowledge, I think they got through concept design, and I know the CID very much wants to get it done.
Okay.
I don't know where it is exactly in, say, a design phase. I don't think it would take much right away because it's using what's there, but I know the CID was kind of leading it, working with GDOT, so it's just a matter of getting it programmed and making it happen, but I think there was certainly interest.
Got it, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of going on now with the whole implementing like a CM or like the signage or whatever, if like the track is blocked. Have you guys had how has it been working with the railroad companies on that? Because I know sometimes they can be a little bit of a pain in the butt to deal with stuff like that when it's out there right away.
So that is something that the CID has really led, not ARC, but I will say the strength there, and part of why it's been important that we worked with CIDs on the freight cluster plans, is that plan, CSX is on, I think was on their board, the CID board. And so they were a part of that plan every step of the way as a board member. So they were seeing presentations like that about that plan. And so it was something where they understood the need. And so I think that it helps that the CID already had that existing relationship with CSX. We certainly do talk to CSX and Norfolk Southern. We know their government relations staff and sometimes talk to others, but sometimes it's, hey, we're happy to have a conversation, but it may not go further than that. But in the case of the CID, because they were already working with them and had them on the board, they were able to kind of get a little more, headway with them. And I think that's been hugely important, not just with the railroads, but with all these freight cluster plans where we've worked with the CID. The CIDs are there to serve the businesses. And so they have a lot of those existing relationships. So that's been very important as we've done the freight cluster plans of that working with the private sector like that.
So I thought it was really interesting with the discrepancies on the rates and just being able to show in all the employees. I do also know that in industry there's more and more automation and things like that. So at some point, as those warehouses start utilizing more automation and they maybe have fewer employees who have to come in or not as many, have you had any kind of modeling to kind of show how that would impact the number of vehicles that would be needing to come in and out of a facility?
We don't have any modeling for that, but I will say, yes, automation already exists in lots of warehouses. I'll give one example, the Kroger warehouse facility there at the former Fort Gillem. I've toured that place twice. We've set up tours. It has one portion of it has 80-foot high clear ceilings. It's a one-story building, but 80 feet high. I don't know what this is, but it's similar to this of just kind of very tall ceilings. But it's mostly automated in that part of it. So it's not something where you have staff that's walking up high to get things. It's automation that's moving things around and moving products through these higher ceilings. So that is being implemented more and more. In that location, they're serving grocery stores. They're serving big box stores. So they still have staff, but they're moving things in and out on pallets. Yes, things then get separated because it's pallets of goods coming in from source providers, and then going out, it's a mix of products going to different grocery stores. And so that's why you have to kind of move and mix and match things up to what's needed at each store. But yes, there's absolutely automation at facilities like that, but they still have a lot of staff there because you still have to have a good many staff. It is a lot fewer staff than they might have otherwise, but you're still having a lot of staff. The difference at something like an Amazon or say the Walmart facility that I mentioned that was e-commerce is the technology is good in that there's literally little bots that lift up entire stacks of the shelving units that they put goods in and move them around on the floor. I don't know that that's in all of these facilities, but they're more and more common where there's different sizes of them, different types. They can move it around to make everything more efficiently, to move goods in and move goods out, making sure you're moving out the older goods and letting the fresher ones go to the back. So there is automation like that's already been implemented for a while. On the flip side, though, the technology isn't there to actually pick the goods. You still have someone who literally is walking around to each shelf in there, almost like being in a store. And so you order these 3 items. They have to walk to different parts of that warehouse, grab those 3 items, take them back, put them in a box, put a label on it, and ship it out. Now, there is some automation of bots that will either lead the staff member or follow them, doing a couple different things. One, the leading is because it is a massive warehouse that's bigger than a typical, Walmart or Publix or other store. So just knowing where to find goods is a challenge, and the bot will know where goods are. And so the staff person can then follow the bot to where it needs to be. And then the bot can also, it's got kind of a container on the top that they can put the goods in there and then go get the next one, so they can get 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 items at once, take it back to the desk where they're working, and then assemble everything, put it in a box, tape it up, put the label on there. So the automation is getting there kind of incrementally, doing things like that, but it's not to the point where it can actually do the picking of goods or actually put it in a box, wrap it, and put the label on it. So it's still labor intensive in that way, but it is kind of a labor assist feature, I guess is what you could call it, in terms of what's happening in automation, something like that. So, but that is always changing, and honestly, they have their own, I've been to their own, the types of trade shows that they have, and World Congress Center, they have something every other year, and it's just, the entire floor is technology like that, and every vendor is showing, here's why my thing is different and better. So it's something where it's progressing, it's tough to take the human element out of it right now for that e-commerce piece. Happy to take any other questions or shoot me an email.
Unless there's any more, thank you, Daniel, for coming. Just a reminder, and I think Ken will throw it up on the screen for me in a second here, but ITSGA annual meeting is coming up this September, so we're really looking forward to seeing y'all there in Jekyll Island. Thanks for coming out today. Look forward to seeing you next month. Take care, everyone. Drive safe. Have a happy holiday weekend as well.